Today we have to welcome Dr. Lystra Small-Clouden. Dr. Small-Clouden, sorry about that, is a national of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Lystra Small-Clouden is a national of Trinidad and Tobago. She holds a doctoral degree in organizational management from Popular University. She's a senior certified global human resource professional with expertise in intercultural leadership. Dr. Small-Clouden has experienced firsthand the challenges for women in leadership and understands the importance of cultural diversity awareness for places in leadership positions today. Dr. Clouden is here to present on her book entitled Globalization, Assimilation, and Culture Erasure in a Review of Trinidad and Tobago. Now this is a study that is very near and dear to the IGDS because apparently we lend support in some way or another. We just say thank you for returning to us to share the information with us. So I give you Dr. Small-Clouden.
Thank you and welcome. It is always good when you can do a study based on culture and based on your nationality and have the privilege and the ability to return home to share those results. Without the support of the IGDS, this study may not have been possible. Students from the Institute of Graduate Studies participated and volunteered their time to complete the survey from which the data was extracted to conduct this study. This study is near and dear to my heart, and also it raises the topic of globalization in the sense that most of the times we go about our day-to-day business and we actually don't recognize or we are not aware of the changes in our culture or the changes around us. Most of us will agree that technology most of the time controls our lives. Most of us are hooked to our smartphones 24/7. And most of us may agree that sometimes without our smartphones we become very confused and because most of the time our smartphones control our lives in the sense that every single thing, our photos, our banking, everything is on your smartphone. So most of the times our technology is what controls our lives. Unfortunately, because most of us are so connected to our smartphones, we are disconnected from the things that are going on around us on a day-to-day basis. I am sure most of us will remember the times when we physically went into the bank to conduct business, or we physically went into a store to make a purchase. Most of the time these days we do our banking online, and most of the times we do our shopping online. I remember the days when we would walk down the street to get public transportation. And when you walk down the street, you will be in contact with people day to day. You say, hi neighbor John, or hi neighbor Paul, and you and neighbor John or neighbor Paul, or you will get together for a couple of minutes, and you will talk about what happened the day before, or you will have the latest neighborhood gossip. These days, everybody jump in their car and they go from point A to point B. You don't know how neighbor John is doing or how neighbor Jean is doing because we have lost that contact. Because most of the time, technology has replaced what we would have socialized with neighbor John and neighbor Jean. And this is what this research is about. It's just saying to you how our lives have changed and we have disconnected socially. And we lose some of that natural identity to socialize because we are hooked to our smartphone. And more or less, this is what globalization does. This is what the internet socialization does. We have lost touch with who we are and who we should have been and going towards a globalized culture. This is my preamble to the study. So let's get into the basics of the study. So the study more or less talks about organizations conducting business in Trinidad and Tobago and most of the English-speaking Caribbean islands. We have been impacted by globalization and the rapid changes in technology. Due to these changes, the culture of the islands have changed. The preservation of our national identities of the islands has also been at risk. The language, the way we talk, our political system, our legal system, the military, our methods of production, the way we grow our food, the way we are educated, the way we erect our buildings, the customs, the values, our family structure, entertainment, the way we dress, the way we eat, the way we prepare our meals, the way we dine out or dine in, they have all undergone numerous changes due to globalization. The study reported on the perceptions of Trinbagonians regarding the devaluation of our own culture to assimilate into a global type culture. The problem is though, because we are so connected to technology, more or less the perspective of culture erasure was not previously known. I want to talk about the definition of culture as proposed by Edgar Schein. He said that a culture is a pattern of shared basic assumptions learned by a group as it solves its problems and external adaptation and integration and internal integration. Schein identified 3 levels of culture. He talks about artifacts, which are visible, espoused beliefs and values, which may appear through surveys, meaning you may ask somebody, what you think about religion, or what you think about the government, what you think about politics, and basic underlying assumptions. These are not visible. And this research focused mainly on those basic underlying assumptions. Hofstede describes culture as the collective programming of the mind which distinguishes the members of one group or category of people from another. The method used for this survey was a quantitative method, and the method examined the relationship among the variables of culture, norms, values, and identity against globalization and assimilation. A sampled population, a random sample of students enrolled at graduate studies at the University of the Western New Augustine participated in the study. They responded to questions via a questionnaire, and a researcher-developed questionnaire contained 27 questions, which were divided into 5 sections. The first section, Section A, contained company information. The second section, global factors which impact culture, norms, and identity. Third, interaction with international business managers or international business colleagues. And Section D, respondents were asked to rate their cultural skills and evaluate their organizational culture. E, questions on management behavior when interacting with international business partners or international business associates. And F, demographic data, age, gender, and education, and religion were all studied. Data was analyzed using SPSS version 22 software, and the reports were done based on descriptive statistics. We examined to determine the relationships between globalization, assimilation, and management behavior against variables of culture, value, norms, and identity. Demographic variables of age, gender, education, and religion were examined to determine the impact of culture, value, and norms on identity. To answer the research question, do managers in Trinidad and Tobago devalue their culture and identity to assimilate into a global type culture? There were 5 sub-questions to support the research question. The sub-research question 1 was on demographic factors. We looked at age, gender, and education and religion as it impacted culture, value, norms, and identity. The findings were that the results showed significant effects for the demographic variable of education in several of the dependent variables. The results can be reflective of the population sample. The question could be asked whether a non-academic sample population will yield the same results. The significant effects of education, though, in this study confirms the statements by Hofstede defining culture, because he said that the mental programming can be inherited, transferred, or learned from birth, and Schein said the deeper levels of basic assumptions and beliefs which operate unconsciously and in a taken for granted fashion. In both instances and in both cultural definitions, education is a common denominator. Sub-research question 2. Do global factors of technology, media advertising, social media, internet, capitalism, education, economic development, music, and laws how do they impact culture, or do they impact culture? The findings were that overall, the results showed global factors have a positive impact on culture, values, norms, and identity. The results, however, showed that there were two factors, commercialism and capitalism, as having a negative impact. Once again, we see here that Schein's statement on basic assumptions operated unconsciously is observed. Respondents cannot escape capitalism and commercialism. These factors are aligned with other global factors of social media, the internet, media advertising, etc. We use our cell phones, our iPods, tablets, which enhance our academic experience or our general life experiences. That is, the way we bank, the way we shop, and the way we are educated. Sub-research question 3. Does the Trinbagonian manager assimilate or integrate during international business meetings? And when I say here international business meetings, even though you do not conduct international business meetings during your day-to-day or during your day-to-day correspondence, there is some form of international interaction you may have. And this is what I want to focus on for the results for sub-question 3. I found the results for sub-question 3 a bit surprising. 93% of the respondents are guarded when approaching and interacting with other cultures. 71% sometimes rejected other cultures. 41% practice acceptance and inclusion. 34% approach other questions with an open mind. And why I was a bit surprised at these results is that I always thought, though, that the Trinidad and Tobago and Caribbean culture to be a little more open. So I was very surprised at these results of the 93% being guarded. But then again, this can be explained through a number of ways. We can think about this historically, and we can even bring in the factor of slavery, of where we are guarded of other cultures because of how we were socialized. Or we could think about it as from the variable of education impacting how we approach other cultures. We approach them guarded because we are waiting to see what they will say or what they will do, or we are actually studying them from the point of view of what can this relationship do with me? Can it be positive or negative? So the results are surprising but can be explained. But overall, we can see the variable of education being very specific on the impacts on the variables. Sub-research question 4. Does assimilation have a positive or negative impact on culture, value, norms, and identity? Respondents were asked to rate cultural skills on a continual scale from high to low on factors of individualism, openness to change, conservatism, self-enhancement, and self-transcendence. Organization culture was evaluated using factors of embeddedness, hierarchy, mastery, effective autonomy, intellectual autonomy, egalitarianism, and harmony. The Short Value Survey, created by Ralston et al., was used in an attempt to bridge the gap between the seminal work of Hofstede regarding globalization. Unfortunately, the only Caribbean island included in Hofstede's seminal work was Jamaica. But the SDS survey did not include any of the Caribbean islands. So I attempted to bridge a gap between what Hofstede's seminal work studied and what we needed for the Caribbean. The findings were that 46.4% of respondents somewhat agreed, and 31.1% strongly agreed that assimilation impacts culture. These results were not surprising. Respondents are torn between preserving the norm while being pulled into the new. Pulled into the new in the sense that I am going with technology, I am going with what is new, I am going with what the world requires of me, but I'm not quite so sure if I should go and how far I should go. So the paradox here is, even though assimilation can be viewed as both negative and positive, participants through the global factors, especially through technology, are unconsciously or unwillingly assimilated towards a global type culture. Question 5. Does the behavior of the Trinbagonian manager change when interacting with international business managers? And respondents here were asked to focus on the elements of power and control within the relationship. The findings were that no change in management behavior occurred as a result of power and control within while interacting with international business managers or international business counterparts. Managers' interactions were measured using the Intercultural Development Inventory, the IDI. Respondents recorded business partner relationships, colleagues, peer relationships. Limited responses, however, recorded a superior element in the relationship. And once again, I think it has to do with the population sample. The population sample, 74% held bachelor's of science degrees, 58% held master's, and 38% held other postgraduate degrees. We can assume that due to the level of education, experience, exposure to social media and the internet and other communication mediums, that respondents possess the confidence and ability to interact with international business partners on a level playing field, meaning without the power of control, without the elements of power and control. I want to conclude that the variable of education has created a level playing field for international interaction. The results support the view that culture is being erased and replaced by a global type culture. Globalization and assimilation act as the eraser, while education acted as the transposer, establishing new symbols and artifacts into the subconscious, which are eventually demonstrated outward into a new identity supported by new cultural norms and values. The results of this study support this view as respondents view assimilation into a more global type culture as a way of doing things, as a way of doing things as a negative. Globalization and technology have impacted elements of academia. Most of us are caught up in a world of gadgets, social networking, which promote uniformity, simplicity, and standardization, ultimately promoting a global type culture. The irony here is that culture erasure is occurring through mental programming, just as defined by Hofstede, and occurring unconsciously in a taken for granted fashion, supported by Schein's definition of culture. Globalization has created an illusionary source of social power and change. The results of the study confirm that Trinidad and Tobago, as well as the islands of the English-speaking Caribbean, are suffering the effects of culture erasure due to globalization, assimilation, and inadvertently through cross-cultural psychologists such as Hofstede and Trompenaars, who promote culture from the European lenses. Recommendations. Further studies are required to ascertain the long-term consequences of surrendering national culture to adopt a global type culture. Academia should play a critical role in culture awareness and preservation, highlighting the struggle with self and the ability to maintain a national identity. Focus on undergoing the illusionary source of social power and change. Discussions on cultural trauma as it relates to social change within Trinidad and Tobago and the English-speaking Caribbean, and whether or not cultural trauma can be escaped in light of the constraints of globalization and the world systems. I want to thank you for your attention, and I welcome the opportunity to share the results with you, and I also welcome the opportunity to answer questions. Thank you.
So I got the impression that perhaps you, or not you, whomever, well yes, your study was acknowledging that a type of culture in itself is perhaps more desirable or better than another kind of culture. I just wondered if the fact that people use tech gadgets, as you mentioned, wouldn't that in itself be a new culture? I just wondered, why should we desire another kind, or perhaps the kind we had before the gadgets?
That question could be answered in many different ways. If I were to ask you, do you think the culture with the gadgets is advantageous or disadvantageous?
advantages?
When you say it's advantages, can you put it in context to me? Would you say advantages towards you achieving something in life? Or would you say advantages to you making your life easier? Or would you say advantages to replacing writing in a notebook using a pen and a pencil?
All of the above.
Right. So your question was, if I thought that we are going towards a global type culture?
I got the impression, I was thinking of the examples that you mentioned, and even, I think, sub-question number 4 in particular. Why would previous, I mean, culture is, I thought culture is fluent, so it would change.
Yes.
So now we have gadgets, there's no way back. Just before we had fire, there's no way back till time before fire. Once you
Right.
got fire, there's no way you can take fire.
Right.
Sort of the same way with gadgets. So I was just wondering why it seemed to me that you were presenting that talking to neighbor Paul was more advantageous than just typing to neighbor Paul if that were my wish.
Right. So
Just
you
my
may want to type to neighbor Paul, but let's say neighbor Paul is 80 years of age, you won't be able to reach neighbor Paul. If neighbor Paul is 22 years of age, you can reach neighbor Paul, and neighbor Paul would prefer that type of communication. So I'm looking at social change and culture. Let's say you are neighbor Paul and you are 22 years of age. What do you think happens to neighbor Jean if she's 85 years of age and you don't have any contact with neighbor Jean? So what I am saying is culture is fluid, and we are transitioning into this fluid type culture because it's being driven by technology, but it's driven at a fast pace, and sometimes you're so wrapped up in technology 24/7, you forgot neighbor Jean, because neighbor Jean is not coming along with that cultural transition as you are coming. Neighbor Jean is still writing on a piece of paper and a pad, while you are neighbor Paul, 24 years old, but you are wrapped up in a new culture. So what is happening is a diversion of culture. The young culture is going towards globalization, while we have people like neighbor Jean left behind.
Okay.
So what I am saying is we have to be aware of neighbor Jean being left behind, because neighbor Jean cannot keep up with us. So that's what, and we are not aware that neighbor Jean is behind us, because we are so wrapped up in our day-to-day, and we are so busy in what we are doing day to day that we forget neighbor Jean.
I'm so sorry I came in very late. We had another forum. I'm with the IGDS.
Hi, Dr. Ford.
And so I really have very little idea about what you said, but I did hear you say the notion that national cultures are being erased and being replaced by global type cultures. And I understand from the response to your question is that this being done without thought, without critique, without analysis of the impact of this replacement. And I have to agree with you that it's being seen as normal. This is how life happens now, and we are living this way because this is how life happens now. But I also have to agree with Angelique that it's inevitable, that it cannot, it's like fire, she said, that was an excellent example. You cannot go back to the days before we understood that you could use fire to cook. So it would seem to me that the helpful thing would be to look at the terms and conditions under which this process is rolling out. What are we losing and what are we gaining? Because we are also gaining, because you now have the capacity for somebody in a village to go viral on the net and impact some facet of global culture. So I agree with you that it perhaps needs to be critiqued and understood, and really understood in terms of its gains and its losses. I also understand that for the younger people, they see no losses.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it behooves a particular kind of scholarship to carefully assess. There are many gains.
Yes.
But there are also losses. And to me, I'm so sorry I came in late. The big issue is, what is the definition? What does it mean to be human in this new evolving age? What is it in nature which you hinted at when you talk about communication, respect to the elders, those who are being left behind, and so what does it mean to be human in the age that is introduced? I don't know if you can comment.
When you say human, are you talking about our social responsibility as humans?
In measure, but also in addition, it's very complex. You have constructed personalities and characters going on there. You have people who are presenting an internet persona that is radically different from the people that they are, and there are other people who are contacting each other via, you have masks talking to masks.
Yes.
You know, and so there's, it's complex, but I just wondered if in terms of your frame, your study,
Yes.
if you went to look at the nature of this intensely technological human that is emerging.
And that is why I spoke about in the recommendations, academia should play a critical role in cultural awareness and preservation, highlighting the struggle with self and the ability to maintain national identity. Because I know there are 22-year-olds who hate to interact with elders that are over 70 because they speak a different language. But then what are our responsibility to them? And I don't want to interact face-to-face because when I interact on social media, I can maintain a different persona. And nobody needs to question me on that persona. But when I interact with the 70-year-old plus, they challenge my persona because they don't understand it. So I feel safe within my identity that I have created on internet and social media because I'm not challenged. I can be whoever I want to be. So, and that's the humanistic aspect of it. So there was always a struggle between the self and the new identity. Yeah. And there is also a struggle when we talk about being human, is that how far do you go being the new global person? In that, do I neglect the original self that I am to adopt this new identity? Or do I preserve it just on the line and then I'm just evolving as somebody else? Because so many times when you meet people on social media, you don't know who you're meeting. So there's always the globalization and the internet and technology always creates the war between self and identity. I can be who I want to be in this space. But then when I am in this space, who am I? What do I want? Who am I really?
Can I be devil's advocate?
Yes.
I am going to be egocentric here, in that being from a young age, I cannot see technology taking over my culture. If nothing, it's enhancing my culture. Because now, because of technology, because of WhatsApp, we can have groups of, I'm a Catholic groups. My priest decided that he's going to have a Facebook page, and it has extended and evangelized, so to speak, some of our young people, some of our older people, some of those who have left. So as much as I am seeing that it's erasure from your point of view, I'm also seeing non-erasure of my culture.
Exactly.
My culture is being enhanced.
And actually the results showed that. The results showed about 43% of people says no, this is positive. And there's another 47% that says no, it is harmful.
Because of technology, I can reach into Rome.
And it has its positives and negatives. But we have to be aware of how to take the positives and the negatives so that you don't impact the negatives. We have to remember Sister Jean on the other side. And remember the things that we don't want lost. Because once it is erased, you cannot regain, just like fire. Once it is evolved, you cannot go back. So we have to remember, take the things that we want to take with us into the evolving culture. Take the things that we cherish near and dear to our hearts.
I have a comment. When you made the point on capitalism and commercialism, I have been out of the country for like 30 years. When I came back, and I went to this place to eat, and I wanted Trinidad Thai food, but all I can find is American Thai food. I went to this place called Mr. Chow's, and I was really disappointed. And it was a nice space, it was nice and airy, I would love to sit there and such. And nothing there reminded me of what I ate when I was here. And I see that as erasure because food is a real major part of our culture. And I love when I go to the beach, I can sit and eat chow. Now that, when I start there, I really feel at home. I feel this is something we shouldn't lose. So people making all kinds of chow, great. And that is an enhancement because all I know is mango chow. Now I see pineapple chow, this kind of chow. And that is, to me, an enhancement of the food experience and so forth. But we did lose, I felt.
But is it a problem that we have both? Because you now have places like the Caribbean making food that people would not eat on a daily basis. So people are consuming their cassava, their provision pie and so. Whereas they may not be cooking that every day at home.
Right.
And there's a definite market now for what would have been old-time food. Creole food, old-time food that is available in commercial supply every single day. So I'm
Like
not
in
sure.
pickles, yeah?
But you see, but that is good. But I have to empathize with this. I went to last week. I was in Antigua, and I asked, "What do the Antiguans have for breakfast?" "Oh no, we only serve continental style breakfast here." There was no choice, and that's when you feel disappointed because there's no choice. And then she said, "Oh no, because this is what the American wants." I said, "So what about the Caribbean people who come to visit?" She said, "No, because this is what we take." I said, "But we just came from European and we want something Caribbean." But they don't offer the choice.
Right.
When they offer the choice, you're happy. But when they don't offer the choice, you're like, okay.
And which one gets the dollars behind it, you know? I felt like, just like you may say, there are smaller organizations that do this or establishments, but how many of them do we really know? How do they get on TV? Mr. Chow is constantly in my ear on that on the radio. That's how I hear about Mr. Chow. I went to check on Mr. Chow. But I don't hear about anybody else getting that kind of radio play so that I can go test their food, you know?
I just want to add that, just generally with regards to globalization and how it impacts like local culture and the authenticity of culture and national identity. I think to a large extent, there's still the mindset that why am I going to pay for something that I could get in my own home as well? And it's important for us as nationals to still try and go out and support what is ours to an extent. Because I have had that being expressed to me when I was like, hey, why do I do some sort of local stuff? And it's like, you would see, like, by grand. So, that mindset is still there, and I think that there's still work to be done in that arena, and that's outside of technology. That's just in who we are as a people.
Okay,
I don't know to what extent, but
right.
it exists.
So you're saying that a workman is never accepted or appreciated in his own home.
Yes.
Is that something? Okay. And unfortunately, as human beings, that's one of our downfalls. I'm going back to Antigua, and I met this lady, and she lives 2 minutes from the beach, and she says to me, "I've never been to this beach." And people are coming from all over the world and paying money, and they're spending all day on the beach. And she says to me, "I've never been to the beach."
But
It's just human nature when something is in front of you.
I get that, but I look at different cultures as well too, and I've interacted with like a French person would never promote any other wine but a French wine, and you have Jamaicans dying for their music, and you have, you see that in certain cultures, in certain countries and stuff like that. But I don't think that there's a strong backing, so to speak, for something like. Well, I would just say, me personally, our food, I would still buy our food and I say, wait, best country, that kind of thing. But something like that there's not that.
And it goes back to capitalism and commercialism. You will hear the advertisement for Kentucky 10,000 times a day, McDonald's 10,000 times a day. But the local foods, you will not hear it advertising. Why? Maybe they don't have the money because Coca-Cola bought out all the airtime. And I don't think it's I don't think it's because it's of a lack of appreciation, but a lack of the resources to fight the powers that be to fight for airtime. Sometimes it may be that we appreciate Kentucky more than we appreciate Callaloo and Crab, but I don't think it's just a matter of one thing saying that it's not that we don't appreciate it, it's because the avenues for appreciation is not as much as there as Kentucky and Subway and McDonald's.
Could you, statistically share about 93% of Trinidadian
Yes.
approaching
The culture is very guarded. Yes.
Could you provide some context around that question?
So
in terms of how
for those of you who came late, let me the question
specifics.
So the question, yeah. It was up question 3, and it talks about does the Trinidad and Tobago manager assimilate or integrate during international business meetings? And I was talking about the findings, and this is the one you're talking about. It's 73% of respondents approach other cultures guarded. Most of the respondents approach from a realm of self-development and enrichment. They prefer this mode of approach. This mode of approach preferred mode of approach was social networking rather than face-to-face. And I was very surprised in the sense that I always thought the Trinidad and Tobago culture was very open, friendly, unassuming. But I don't know if it's because of the population, and I think it is because of the population, the sample population, that the 73% of respondents oppose other cultures guardingly. And I would say it's the sample population, because in academia, you tend to be guarded with respect to anything new. You take your time, you observe, you're very guarded, you're not saying much, and you're listening to hear what the other person has to offer before you render a response. And I think that is why I think the 73%, the high response rate. I think if it were another sample population, a more general population, I think the responses would be different. Because these are one of the results that surprised me. I really thought that we were a more open, a more friendly community.
And again, the play devil's advocate as somebody who I have observed a particular dynamic. My entire family is migrated. I'm practically the only member of my family left here. And what I have noted, and I think that from what you're saying, that makes, and what we call, make the issues a bit more complex. There's a cultural dynamic which operates. Persons who have gone abroad to benefit from first world associations, affiliation, enrichment, education, whatever, treasure a notion of the places they have left us essentialized, fixed in this cultural bubble. The foods remain, the culture, the habits, and so. And because when they return, they want to enjoy the life as they knew it, or as they fantasized that it should have remained as a child when they were children. And what I find, particularly in my relatives, is it's a mourning. They mourn the loss, and of this cultural erasure, this cultural loss, and so. And it's a very valid mourning. As a matter of fact, in the capitalist terms, it's very lucrative because it spawns huge ethnic food industries abroad, huge industries, because people who are longing for the comfort. A comfort, it's visceral, the taste and feel and smell of home, and they long for that comfort. They spend good money to buy it, right? So, and which is an impact of globalization, because they can import it, they can carry it, but what kind of things, roti, whatever. People who are importing callaloo, bush, etc., whatever. But what I see as somebody who, I suppose, as a counter to that, because as I say, all my family migrated, and so I set myself to stay here, because what I felt is that when I saw what globalization did to them, then, maybe now it's different, they themselves in their bodies and in their flesh could not return to live here. They could not, because they couldn't tolerate the slow moving. They couldn't tolerate the inefficiencies. They loved to enjoy the beaches and the callaloo and the lime and this and that. But the way of life here was something they could not tolerate. So I set myself in opposition to that, because I said to myself, I did not want to lose home for a dream of home. Okay?
Yes, yes.
So I'm just putting that on the table in terms of how it may have shaped. I'm so sorry I missed the presentation, so I could be talking complete rubbish. How it may have shaped what is part of the statement, because what I find as somebody who has set myself to remain here and who has closely tracked Caribbean culture, literary form and expressions and so, is that there's an amazing creativity that has emerged in relation to what would have been local, what would have been domestic, things that would have been domestic patterns of consumption, domestic foods and waste have gone on the ground and come up as something else and come up as something else. So what I see is quite a stringent resistance to the globalization, to the Kentuckys and so, by ways now of making daily consumption and daily habits available to generations and generations of people, even if it is no longer as closely tied to the home.
Yes.
So I'm not, so you know, the erasure, I don't know about erasure, transformation is more like it. And I don't see any sign of it stopping. Like I don't think that in my granddaughter's generation that, you know, I think that it's, whatever that process is that I'm talking, a rhizome that's running, propping up in different ways, creative ways, I expect it to continue to run.
Yes, and it will. And I want to go back to two words that you said in the statements about your family.
Yeah.
You said when they return to Trinidad, they cannot tolerate the way of life. And I would ask you one question before I answer the question. When you go abroad to visit your family, how do you feel?
Well, what they have done is that they have created pockets of home. So I tell them, don't waste your callaloo on me. I have callaloo running away. Don't, because they will bring out their best. They will bring out their callaloo and their pastel, and they're excited to be able to share it, because that's what means family to them, and family has come and they want to. So they have created pockets of home, and even though they have done well and they have thrived, the nostalgia is very, very important to how they live.
Exactly. And then I'm going to go back to the word tolerate. And I picked on the word tolerate because, and then you said nostalgia. Is it really, and I prefer the word nostalgia because tolerate means that the coming home makes them stress because it's a slower pace and the efficiency is not there. You go to the bank and you take 10 hours for something you can do in 2 minutes. So it's, on the one hand, it's I don't want to use the word tolerate because you love your country, but you don't want to use, but you can't take the inefficiencies because you find people wouldn't stand up in the line, they wouldn't wait at the stop sign. So I don't want to use the word tolerate because you know what? You sit in the car and you're watching it and it makes you smile. Because something deep down inside of you, the nostalgia is there, and this is what you appreciate because this is home. This is home. And sometimes you go back to where it's efficient, stress-free. No, not stress-free because it's not stress-free. It's so efficient that it makes you stress. It creates stress, and you tolerate it. Because, no, you do, because you stand in the line and you are very decent, but if you come home, you don't have to. So I'm picking on words that you use, and you know, you come home and it's different, but it's home. And they make the callaloo for you because they're happy to see something from home.
That's right.
And they want to appreciate something from home. So they develop the Trini mindset. And they appreciate it for even the 2 weeks that you're there with them because it's home.
Yeah.
And living in that globalized society, that's where identity comes in again. You live 2 lives.
Yeah.
You live survival mode and you live expectancy mode. You're there because you need to survive and there was a reason you're there, but when you come back home, you're home. Even though you're fed up of the way that things are being done, and at the end of the day, it's home. And as you said before, it is going to continue to change at a fast pace. And what I want to bring up now is people who live abroad and then they come back to Trinidad or they come back home and they expect things to be the same. And they complain because things are not the same. Things cannot be the same. And you know what? Those same people who complain that things are changing, they will complain, Trinidadian won't change it. This should be this, this should be that. But when you change it, they complain. So, but you know what? The complaining is not that they don't like it. It's just part of who we are. We have to complain. But we appreciate and we love where we came from. So it's a paradox because you love it and you hate it, but it's home. And juxtapose that into the sense of globalization. And you're angry because, oh my gosh, you can never get back those days. They're not going to come back, they don't ever. So it's a kind of, I feel cheated, so I lash out. And that's what the world is going to continue to be. So the erasure is there. We cannot help it. You can't stop change, but we have to deal within ourselves that it's going to change and it's not going to get back that way. Childhood is gone and things of your childhood you can't bring back.
I miss the uniqueness of culture, like worldwide, and I wonder what would happen in time, because then everything it seems would resemble the other, and you start to, the uniqueness of culture seem to get, I think, erased.
That was the point I was going to make actually, especially when I was going to point out to like vulnerable, for example, the authenticity of what our traditional documents and what's going on to know. I think those things are really unfortunate losses in society as globalization happens.
Yeah. So at this point here, I don't know if you all know the David Rutherford starts with the line Hail Trinity. You run away from the pain. You run away from the pain, but the jokes draws you back again. This presentation, in terms of cultural erasure, has kind of brought us into many different spaces. I find that I must say thanks to Small-Clouden for using a quantitative study to bring us to this discussion on culture and so many other ways, aspects of our globalized world. I'm going to say to you, thanks for coming. The Institute has the book for sale. We have copies here. Please, it's $100, $100 TT. So please feel free to get yourself a copy, because I think if you any students of cultural studies, any students of HR, any students of international relations, global governance, anything of the sort, you really should get